Jake Martinez had exactly 3 things to his name: a mop, a bucket, and the crushing realization that a degree in xenobiology meant absolutely nothing when you owed the Galactic Student Loan Corporation your firstborn child. Well, technically his soul, but the paperwork was surprisingly similar. He stood in the service corridor of the Golden Nebula, the most luxurious space station this side of the Andromeda Galaxy, watching through a maintenance viewport as yet another shuttle full of ridiculously wealthy aliens glided into the docking bay. Each ship probably cost more than his entire planet's gross domestic product. Meanwhile, Jake was rationing his dinner of 99-cent ramen noodles like they were made of platinum. "Another glamorous evening in paradise," he muttered, stirring the sad noodles with a plastic fork he'd been reusing for 3 weeks. The flavor packet claimed to be beef and mystery vegetables, but Jake was pretty sure the mystery was why anyone would voluntarily eat this stuff. That's when the announcements started blaring through the station's crystal communication arrays. "Attention all personnel, Her Imperial Magnificence, Empress Vexthera of the Draknari Empire, Conqueror of 7 systems, Destroyer of the Zephyrian Fleet, and Keeper of the Sacred War Beasts, will be arriving momentarily. All staff are required to maintain maximum respectful distance and avoid direct eye contact under penalty of immediate vaporization." Jake nearly choked on his noodles. The Dragon Queen herself was coming here. Vexthera was legendary across the galaxy, not just for conquering half the known universe, but for her 3 beloved puppies that she brought everywhere. Of course, calling them puppies was like calling a supernova a pretty light show. These were Draknari war beasts, each the size of a small hovercar, with teeth that could slice through starship hull plating and tempers that made their owner look cuddly by comparison. Through the viewport, Jake watched as a massive obsidian battlecruiser approached, its hull decorated with enough gold and jewels to fund a small colony. The ship didn't so much dock as gracefully impose itself upon the station's docking clamps. "And I thought my student loans were intimidating," Jake said, taking another bite of his pathetic dinner. Little did he know that those sad processed noodles were about to change his life in ways that would make winning the galactic lottery look like finding pocket change. The Golden Nebula's automatic systems shifted into high security mode, and Jake could hear Captain Reeves over the intercom, his voice cracking with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was probably stress-eating antacids by the handful. "Remember people, the Empress's war beasts are not pets. They are highly trained killing machines with a taste for expensive cuisine and anyone who looks at them wrong. The station's master chef has prepared a 7-course meal featuring delicacies from across the empire. Everything must be perfect." Jake looked down at his ramen and shrugged. At least his dinner couldn't possibly make this situation any worse. Famous last words. Within exactly 17 minutes of the Dragon Queen's arrival, the Golden Nebula had transformed from a peaceful luxury resort into what Jake could only describe as a really expensive panic room with better lighting. He was mopping the floors near the royal suite when he heard the first scream. Not a human scream, mind you, but the kind of terrified shriek that only a 5-star celebrity chef makes when his life's work gets completely rejected by 3 alien war beasts who'd rather starve than eat his food. "They won't touch anything," Chef Brillantine wailed, his 4 arms flailing dramatically as he burst through the service doors. The quintessential essence of nebula squid, the crystallized moonbeam soufflé, even the liquid gold truffle reduction that costs more per ounce than most planets' defense budgets. They just sniff it and walk away like I'm serving them garbage. Jake paused his mopping to watch the chaos unfold. Through the reinforced windows of the royal suite, he could see Empress Vexthara pacing back and forth, her scaled tail lashing with the kind of barely controlled fury that had once reduced an entire star system to cosmic dust. Her 3 puppies sat in the corner, looking miserable and getting skinnier by the hour. Captain Reeves appeared, his uniform already soaked with nervous sweat despite the station's perfect climate control. "Options, people. I need options. The Empress has made it very clear that if her precious war beasts don't eat something soon, she's going to use this station for target practice. We've tried everything." Dr. Kessler, the station's xenobiologist, threw his hands up in defeat. "Draknari dietary supplements, live prey from 6 different worlds. Even that fermented plant matter they supposedly love. Nothing works." Jake watched as a parade of the galaxy's most expensive food specialists rushed in and out of the royal suite, each one emerging more defeated than the last. Nutritionists, animal behaviorists, even a guy who claimed to be a pet psychic, though Jake was pretty sure that was just a fancy way of saying professional guesser. "Maybe they're homesick," suggested the head of hospitality services, grasping at straws. "Maybe they're plotting to kill us all and this is psychological warfare," offered the security chief, who clearly had trust issues. Through it all, the Dragon Queen's voice could be heard through the walls, alternating between baby talk directed at her starving warbeasts and death threats directed at pretty much everyone else. Mommy's precious little destroyers need to eat. Come on, babies. Just one little bite of the nice expensive food. No? Well then, I suppose I'll have to start vaporizing people until you develop an appetite. Jake continued mopping, trying to stay invisible while simultaneously getting the best view of the most expensive meltdown in galactic history. The warbeasts looked absolutely miserable, their usually gleaming scales dull and their massive heads drooping with hunger. For creatures that could allegedly bite through titanium, they looked surprisingly pathetic. 18 hours, Captain Reeves announced to anyone within earshot. 18 hours until the Empress decides we're all incompetent and turns us into space debris. Anybody got any brilliant ideas they'd like to share before we all become part of the local asteroid field? Jake looked down at his mop bucket, then at his half-eaten ramen sitting on his maintenance cart. He had an idea, but it was so stupid that it just might work, or get him killed. Probably both. The Dragon Queen's voice echoed through the station again. If my babies don't eat soon, I'm going to start feeding this station's crew to them piece by piece until they remember their appetites. Yeah, definitely both. Jake had always believed that his life was governed by Murphy's Law. Whatever could go wrong, would go wrong, and it would happen at the worst possible moment while he was holding something he couldn't afford to replace. This philosophy had served him well through countless disasters, from accidentally flooding his college dorm to somehow managing to break a supposedly indestructible cleaning robot. But today, Murphy's Law was about to work in his favor for the first time in his 26 years of existence. He was wheeling his maintenance cart past the royal suite, trying to be invisible while simultaneously rubbernecking at the ongoing disaster, when the station's gravity generators decided to hiccup. Just a tiny fluctuation, barely noticeable to most people, but enough to send Jake's cart rolling forward faster than he'd intended. Oh come on, he muttered, lunging forward to catch his dinner before it could slide off the cart. His half-eaten cup of ramen, still steaming with that artificial beef smell that somehow managed to be both appetizing and vaguely concerning, teetered on the edge of disaster. He managed to grab the cup, but physics had other plans. The lid popped off, and the contents went airborne in a graceful arc that would have been beautiful if it weren't about to ruin his entire day. The cheap noodles and mystery broth splattered across the floor in front of the royal suite's entrance, creating what was probably the galaxy's most expensive mess. Perfect. Jake groaned, already calculating how many extra shifts he'd need to work to pay for the floor cleaning. Just absolutely perfect. That's when he heard it. A sound he'd never heard before, but somehow knew was significant. It was a low, rumbling whine, like a cross between a purr and a whimper, coming from inside the royal suite. The massive doors slid open, and one of the Dragon Queen's warbeasts poked its head out. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small shuttlecraft, with iridescent scales that shifted between deep blue and emerald green. Its eyes, each the size of dinner plates, fixed on the spilled ramen with an intensity that made Jake's survival instincts start screaming. A nice puppy, Jake said weakly, reaching for his mop. I'll just clean this up and get out of your way. The warbeast ignored him completely. Instead it approached the spilled ramen, with the cautious reverence of a food critic discovering a hidden gem. It sniffed delicately, then began lapping up the cheap noodles and artificial broth with obvious enthusiasm. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, Jake whispered. The first warbeast's dining attracted the attention of its siblings. Soon all three creatures were crowded around the spill, fighting over the last few noodles like they were made of pure gold. Their tails wagged with enough force to rattle the nearby bulkheads, and they were making happy growling sounds that probably meant they weren't planning to eat Jake for dessert. What in the name of the 7 sacred nebulae is happening out here? The Dragon Queen's voice cut through the air like a plasma sword through butter. Empress Vexthara emerged from her suite, all 7 feet of her, looking like someone had crossed a supermodel with a particularly elegant dragon, and given the result a really bad attitude. She stopped dead when she saw her precious warbeasts happily slurping up the remains of Jake's dinner. Her golden eyes, each containing enough fury to melt a small moon, fixed on Jake with the kind of attention that usually preceded someone becoming a very small pile of ash. You, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd conquered star systems before breakfast. Human, what did you do to my babies? Jake looked at the empty ramen cup in his hands, then at the 3 warbeasts who were now trying to lick the floor clean. I spilled my dinner. The Dragon Queen's expression shifted from murderous to curious, which Jake decided was probably a marginal improvement. What kind of dinner? Instant ramen, Jake said, holding up the empty cup like it was evidence in his own trial. 99 cent. artificial beef flavor, expired last month but still technically edible. For a moment, the corridor was silent, except for the sound of 3 warbeasts trying to extract every last molecule of flavor from the floor. Then the Dragon Queen smiled, and Jake realized that being the focus of her curiosity might actually be worse than being the target of her anger. Interesting, she purred. Very interesting indeed. Jake had always imagined that if he ever met galactic royalty, it would involve more bowing and less standing in a puddle of his own spilled dinner while 3 alien warbeasts licked his shoes. But here he was, living the dream. The Dragon Queen circled him slowly, her golden eyes taking in every detail of his stained janitor's uniform and bargain store footwear. Tell me, human, what is your name? Jake Martinez, your Imperial Magnificence, he said, trying to remember the proper forms of address from the station's employee handbook. I'm a maintenance and sanitation specialist, level 3. Jake Martinez, she repeated, as if tasting the words. And this magical sustenance that has awakened my children's appetites after days of refusing the galaxy's finest cuisine. Where did you acquire such a treasure? Jake held up the empty ramen cup again, still not quite believing this was his life now. The vending machine on deck 7. It was the last one, and it was stuck, so I had to bang on the machine for like 10 minutes to get it to drop. Captain Reeves chose that moment to arrive with half the station's senior staff in tow, probably expecting to find Jake's charred remains and 3 well-fed warbeasts. Instead, he found the Dragon Queen engaged in what appeared to be a serious culinary consultation with the station's least important employee. Your Magnificence, Reeves began carefully, if there's been some kind of incident. Silence, the Dragon Queen commanded, without taking her eyes off Jake. The human and I are discussing matters of galactic importance. She turned back to Jake. This ramen, can you make more? I mean, yeah, I've got like 6 cups left in my locker, Jake said. They're all expired, but honestly I don't think that stuff can actually go bad. It's probably mostly preservatives anyway. The Dragon Queen's face lit up with an expression that Jake was pretty sure had never been directed at expired convenience food before. Excellent. I am prepared to offer you a position as Royal Food Specialist to the Draknari Empire, with a salary of 1 million galactic credits per year, full diplomatic immunity, and your own personal star cruiser. The corridor went dead silent. Jake was pretty sure he heard Captain Reeves make a choking sound, but his brain was too busy trying to process numbers with more zeros than he'd ever seen in one place. 1 million? He squeaked. Per year, the Dragon Queen confirmed. Plus benefits. Your sole responsibility would be to ensure my children receive proper nutrition. Clearly, you possess knowledge that our greatest culinary experts lack. Jake looked down at the 3 warbeasts, who were now sitting at his feet like enormous scaly puppies waiting for treats. One of them was approximately the size of his apartment, and all 3 were looking at him with the kind of hopeful expression usually reserved for rescue shelter commercials. Okay, he said slowly. But I should probably mention that I don't actually know anything about cooking. I just heat up whatever's cheapest and try not to die from food poisoning. Modesty, the Dragon Queen declared, clapping her hands together with obvious delight. A true master never reveals his secrets easily. But surely you can share some wisdom about these ancient human delicacies. Jake stared at the empty ramen cup. Ancient human delicacies. Right. Well, the secret is in the artificial flavor enhancement compounds. And the way they're processed using traditional human methods that have been passed down through generations of food scientists. He was making this up as he went along, but the Dragon Queen was nodding seriously, like he was revealing the mysteries of the universe. And the preparation ritual? She asked. Oh, that's crucial, Jake said, warming to his ridiculous topic. You have to use exactly the right amount of boiling water, and then you wait for exactly 3 minutes. Not 2, not 4, 3. It's all about honoring the ancient timing traditions. Fascinating. And this particular variety, this artificial beef flavor. Jake glanced at the ingredient list on the cup. Well, it contains monosodium glutamate, which is basically like a concentrated umami essence. Very sacred to humans. And there's thiamine mononitrate, which is a powerful spiritual compound that connects the consumer to their ancestors. He was pretty sure thiamine mononitrate was just vitamin B1, but the Dragon Queen was eating this up like her war beasts had devoured his ramen. Your Magnificence, one of her advisors interrupted nervously. Perhaps we should consult with our nutritional experts before. Are you questioning my judgment, Vorthak? The Dragon Queen's voice dropped to a temperature somewhere near absolute zero. Of course not, Your Magnificence. I simply meant, Jake Martinez, she announced, completely ignoring her advisor, will return with me to the Imperial homeworld, where he will establish a proper kitchen for preparing these sacred human foods. We shall spare no expense in acquiring the finest artificial beef flavor packets in the galaxy. Jake's brain finally caught up with his mouth. Actually, Your Magnificence, about that. The thing is, part of what makes this food so special is its authenticity. You can't just buy the expensive versions. It has to be the cheapest, most processed stuff you can find. Otherwise it loses its spiritual potency. The Dragon Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. You're telling me that my children require the cheapest food in the galaxy. The cheapest human food, Jake clarified quickly. It's about connecting with the genuine human experience of economic struggle and making do with what you have. It's very philosophical. My people call it poverty cuisine, and it's deeply meaningful to our culture. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought he'd pushed too far. Then the Dragon Queen smiled again, and he realized she was absolutely buying every word of his improvised nonsense. Brilliant, she breathed. My children are not just eating food, they are experiencing authentic human culture. They are connecting with the noble struggle of your species. She turned to her advisors. Prepare contracts immediately. Jake Martinez is now the highest paid janitor in galactic history. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself living in what could only be described as the galaxy's most ridiculous situation. He had his own wing of the Dragon Queen's palace. A staff of 12 confused alien chefs who'd been reassigned to help him prepare authentic human struggle cuisine, and a pantry stocked with enough processed junk food to feed a small army of college students. The war beasts who he'd learned were named Destroyer, Annihilator, and Princess Buttercup. The Dragon Queen had a soft spot, were thriving on a steady diet of hot dogs, pizza rolls, and various forms of instant noodles. They'd gained weight, their scales were shinier than ever, and they followed Jake around like enormous deadly pets. But something was bothering him, and it wasn't just the existential crisis of being paid more money than some planetary governments had in their entire budgets to serve junk food to alien monsters. Jake, the Dragon Queen said, finding him in the palace gardens where he'd been contemplating his bizarre new life. You seem troubled. Are my children not eating well? Oh no, they're eating great, Jake assured her. Princess Buttercup went through an entire sleeve of corn dogs yesterday, and Destroyer has developed a real taste for those cheese-filled hot dog things. It's not that. Empress Vexthera settled beside him on the ornate bench, which was probably worth more than his entire home planet. Then what troubles you, my friend? Friend. Jake still couldn't get used to that. The most feared ruler in the galaxy considered him a friend because he'd introduced her war beasts to processed meat products. It's just, he began carefully. I keep thinking about why they like this stuff so much. I mean, you've got access to the finest cuisine in the universe. Literal ambrosia from the gods of Altair 7. Food that's been blessed by cosmic entities, and your war beasts prefer gas station hot dogs. The Dragon Queen was quiet for a moment, watching her 3 children play in the distance. Princess Buttercup was currently trying to catch a ball that was approximately 1/10 her size, while her brothers wrestled over what appeared to be a squeaky toy shaped like a small starship. You know, she said finally, I have been wondering the same thing. At first I thought it was simply superior human culinary science, but lately I've been observing them more carefully. And, they're happier than they've ever been. Her voice carried a note of something Jake had never heard before. Uncertainty. For their entire lives, they've been fed the finest, most expensive, most carefully prepared foods in the galaxy. Everything was tested, analyzed, optimized for their nutritional needs. Every meal was a formal affair with specific protocols and dietary requirements. Jake nodded slowly. Sounds exhausting. It was. For them and for me. The Dragon Queen's golden eyes fixed on her war beasts, who were now engaged in what appeared to be a 3-way tug-of-war over a rope toy. I wanted to give them the best of everything. The most luxurious life possible, but I think I gave them everything except the one thing they actually wanted. Which was, to just be normal. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual commanding laugh. It was softer, almost sad. Your processed human foods aren't special because of their ingredients or their preparation. They're special because they're real. They're what regular people eat when they're not trying to impress anyone or prove anything. They're honest. Jake stared at her. You're telling me that the 3 most dangerous predators in the galaxy just wanted to eat like regular people? I think they were tired of being treated like precious artifacts, the Dragon Queen said. Every meal was a ceremony. Every bite was analyzed and measured. They never got to just grab something quick and enjoy it without 12 different specialists taking notes. As if to prove her point, Destroyer wandered over and dropped a slobbery tennis ball at Jake's feet. tail wagging hopefully. Jake threw the ball, and the massive war beast bounded after it with all the dignity of an overexcited puppy. "And what about you?" Jake asked. "Are you tired of the ceremony too?" The Dragon Queen was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know how long it's been since I've had a meal that wasn't a state dinner? Since I've eaten something just because I wanted to, not because it was politically necessary or nutritionally optimal or culturally significant. How long? I honestly can't remember." She stood up and brushed imaginary dust off her elaborate robes. "Jake, would you mind if I asked you to prepare something for me? Not for state purposes or diplomatic reasons, just because I'm curious." "Sure, what do you want?" "I want to try this ramen that started everything. The expired 99-cent, artificial beef flavor ramen, that somehow saved my children from starvation and made you the galaxy's most unlikely celebrity chef." 10 minutes later, Jake found himself in the most advanced kitchen in the known universe, using equipment worth more than most star systems to boil water and prepare 2 cups of instant ramen. The Dragon Queen sat across from him at a simple table he'd requested instead of her usual formal dining setup. "No ceremony," she said, as he handed her the steaming cup. "No analysis, no protocol, just 2 people eating cheap noodles." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The ramen was exactly what it had always been: processed, artificial, and probably terrible for you. But sitting there with the most powerful being in the galaxy, sharing a meal that cost less than $1, Jake realized something important. "You know what's funny?" he said finally. "What?" "This is probably the most authentic meal you've had in years, and it's completely fake food." The Dragon Queen laughed. Really laughed, for what Jake suspected was the first time in a very long time. "Jake Martinez," she said, "I think you understand more about ruling an empire than most of my advisors. How's that? Sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't the most expensive thing you can afford. Sometimes it's just the most honest thing you have." Outside, Princess Buttercup was barking at a butterfly, while her brothers had discovered the joy of rolling around in the grass. They looked nothing like the fearsome war beasts that had terrorized half the galaxy. They looked like what they'd apparently always wanted to be, just 3 big goofy pets enjoying a normal day. "So what happens now?" Jake asked. The Dragon Queen smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it wasn't the smile of an empress or a conqueror. It was just the smile of someone who'd finally figured out something important. "Now," she said, "we're going to change everything." 6 months later, Jake stood in the grand opening of his first authentic human experience restaurant on the luxury space station New Byzantium, watching a line of alien dignitaries that stretched around 3 city blocks, all waiting to pay premium prices for what was essentially a gas station convenience store with table service. The menu was a masterpiece of absurdist marketing. Hot dogs were listed as traditional human ceremonial protein cylinders. Instant mac and cheese had been renamed sacred cheddar meditation bowls. Energy drinks were advertised as ancient human warrior elixirs, and the vending machine snacks were presented as mystical preservation artifacts from the human homeworld. "This is insane," Jake muttered to himself, watching a delegation of Centaurian ambassadors reverently photograph their corn dogs before taking their first bites. "This is absolutely insane, and I'm getting rich off it." The Draknari Empire had undergone what historians would later call the Great Simplification. After the Dragon Queen's personal revelation about authenticity, she'd gradually dismantled many of the elaborate protocols and ceremonies that had governed her rule for decades. State dinners now featured simple, honest food alongside the traditional delicacies. Palace meetings happened in casual settings instead of formal throne rooms. The entire empire had relaxed in ways that nobody had thought possible, and her war beasts had become the galaxy's first and only alien food critics, with their own weekly show called Destroyer Annihilator and Princess Buttercup Rate Your Snacks. Their reviews were surprisingly insightful, though they had a tendency to give everything 5 stars if it came with a squeaky toy. "Jake." The Dragon Queen's voice cut through the restaurant's opening day chaos. She approached his table wearing, of all things, casual clothes. Not the elaborate robes of state, not the ceremonial armor of conquest, just simple, comfortable clothing that looked suspiciously like what Jake had been wearing the day they met. "Your Magnificence," he said, standing up quickly. "Vex," she corrected with a grin. "We've been through this. When you're not on official palace business, you can use my actual name. Besides, I'm here as a customer tonight, not as an empress." She was right, of course. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved from employer and employee to something resembling actual friendship. It turned out that once you got past the whole terrifying galactic conqueror thing, Vex was actually pretty good company. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of ancient history, a surprisingly dry sense of humor, and an unfortunate addiction to those little chocolate donuts that came in packages of 6. "So how's business?" she asked, settling into the booth across from him. Completely ridiculous, Jake admitted. I've got a waiting list 3 months long. The Emperor of Proxima Centauri wants to hire me to cater his daughter's wedding. I've been offered my own cooking show, a book deal, and some kind of endorsement contract for artificial flavoring compounds. All because I accidentally spilled cheap noodles on the floor. And how do you feel about that? Jake considered the question seriously. Honestly, I feel like I'm living in someone else's dream. 6 months ago, I was eating expired ramen in a storage closet and wondering if I'd ever pay off my student loans. Now I'm apparently the galaxy's leading expert on authentic human cuisine, which is basically just junk food with fancy descriptions. But you're happy. I'm happy, he admitted. I mean, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm doing, but I'm happy. And your kids are happy, which is what matters most. As if summoned by their conversation, Princess Buttercup's massive head appeared in the restaurant's window, followed by her 2 brothers. The 3 war beasts had become minor celebrities in their own right, and their public appearances usually drew crowds of admirers. Today they were wearing matching bandanas that read official snack taste testers. They've been asking about you, Vex said. Princess Buttercup specifically requested that you make her those cheese-stuffed pretzel things for her birthday next week. She has a birthday. Well, technically it's the anniversary of her first successful conquest, but she prefers to think of it as a birthday. She's very sentimental. Jake watched the 3 enormous predators pressing their faces against the window, tails wagging as they spotted him. You know what's really weird? I think I'm going to miss them when I eventually move on to the next restaurant. Who says you have to move on? I mean, eventually people are going to figure out that I'm just a guy who knows how to heat up processed food. The novelty will wear off. Vex shook her head. Jake, you're still missing the point. This isn't about the food. It never was about the food. It's about what you represent, which is authenticity in a galaxy full of artificial perfection, honesty in a universe built on pretense. You've shown an entire civilization that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer isn't the most expensive thing you can afford, it's the most genuine thing you have. She gestured around the restaurant, where alien dignitaries were happily munching on corn dogs and sharing stories about their own home planet's simple comfort foods. You've given people permission to stop pretending that everything has to be perfect and formal and impressive all the time. You've reminded them that it's okay to just enjoy something simple and honest, even if it costs 99 cents and comes from a vending machine. Jake looked around his restaurant, taking in the sight of some of the galaxy's most powerful beings bonding over shared bags of chips and arguing about whether the blue or red flavored drinks were better. In the corner, a group of young aliens were teaching each other drinking games with energy drinks, while their parents looked on with the kind of indulgent smiles that suggested they were remembering their own youth. So what happens next? He asked. Next, you keep doing what you're doing. You keep reminding people that authenticity is more valuable than perfection, and that the best meals are the ones shared with friends regardless of what's on the menu. Vex stood up and headed toward the door. But right now, you have customers waiting, and I believe Princess Buttercup is about to start howling if she doesn't get her corn dog soon. Jake looked out the window at the 3 war beasts, who were now pressed so firmly against the glass that they were leaving nose prints everywhere. Princess Buttercup saw him looking and gave him what he had learned to recognize as her hungry face, which was identical to her happy face, her excited face, and her I would like attention face. He walked over to the kitchen and started preparing an order of corn dogs, extra mustard, hold the ceremony. Outside, the most feared predators in the galaxy waited patiently for their favorite human to serve them the galaxy's most expensive junk food. Jake Martinez, former broke janitor, current accidental philosopher of authentic living, and permanent friend to 3 alien war beasts who just wanted to be normal, smiled as he worked. He'd found his calling in the strangest possible way, but he'd found it nonetheless. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he was already planning the next restaurant's menu. He was thinking about adding those little packets of crackers that came with soup. The aliens were going to lose their minds over those. The galaxy would never be the same.